Yeah. Marc. Okay. Marc. Good afternoon. Thank you so very much for. I mean, I'm very happy to come. We can explain that we're in the same office. Yeah. And Marc's just over there. And we called it on Zoom. So I'm very happy just to come speak.
It's a pleasure for me to have you here.
Pleasure is very much mine, Marc, and thank you for the opportunity to come and chat to you. And also for agreeing to do this kind of short one-to-one introduction just about the nature of embodied music cognition and how, as you've been at the presentation for the digital score, how you feel it could help us expand or enhance the theoretical study of the digital score, musicking in the digital score. So I don't know if you want to start by basically introducing that concept to us.
Okay. So embodied music cognition, or embodied interaction, as we now tend to call it, because cognition is perhaps not the only thing that we want to address. We also address the emotional system, the expressive system, and the expressive system is an interaction system. So embodied interaction is perhaps even a better term than embodied cognition, but nevertheless both involve music. And the idea is that in dealing with music, we involve our body. And the reason we do that is that it allows us to understand music really from the inside, as you would say, to experience it. Music itself, let's first look at what music could be, and then why we need embodiment to understand it. So in my thinking about music, I came up with, I came to the conclusion basically that music basically consists of two things. The first thing is the pattern, that there is an emergent hierarchical structuring of patterns going on in music. We see that in the domain of pitch, for example. We have patterns of frequencies. You touch the piano key and you have a pattern of frequencies that we hear as one single pitch. And if particular combinations of pitch are created, we hear them as chords. And if you have sequences of chords, particular sequences of chords lead you to tonal centers. And you can have different tonal centers. You know, in the Western music, we have 12 major centers and 12 minor centers and so on. But this illustrates that there is a hierarchy, and it starts from the same pattern, only frequency patterns, basically, that in different combinations have, meanings, and they define internally how patterns relate to other patterns that defines already particular meaning. So here we have the emergent feature of music. We also have it in the rhythmic domain. Okay, we have rhythms, but we have the meter that is a superstructure, a super pattern of that. So also there we have emergent patterns. So that's one layer. We don't have that so clearly in language. We speak with words, and that's one level kind of thing. Of course, over time, you could also say, okay, there's a hierarchy, but at the same time, no, we only have one kind of layer. In music, we have different layers together that make it into a complex pattern that is meaningful. So that's a big difference. And the second thing is that those patterns are endowed with expression. When we realize those patterns as a performer, we encode the patterns with an expression added. And that expression is related to our embodiment. That's how we move, that's how we communicate to other people what we, how we stand in the world, how we feel. So that's the expression. So the expression is a bio signal. It's meant to evoke an expression in another person. And this type of patterns, they are characterized by the fact that they are time-dependent patterns. They deploy over time at relatively low frequency, at a low frequency. Not such a high frequencies as we have with pitch. They are very high frequencies, but gestures are very low frequencies, typically, let's say 2 hertz. It's a typical frequency, but even lower than 2 hertz is the characteristics of those expressive patterns. And so they are mixed with those emergent patterns, and the expressive patterns, they are mixed and they reinforce each other. Good performance are capable of having their expression giving you better patterns. That's sometimes I look at this. So they help each other in becoming more clear. And if you realize that, very often what we call good performances is actually these 2 things go together. And so the embodiment is already there, because now we can say that an encoded music as sound contains patterns that appeal, that work as affordances, that afford us to relate those patterns to our own expressive system. And that expressive system can be understood, if you exaggerate on that, as a repertoire of actions or gestures. Gestures are just movements that have a beginning point and an end point. Actions are a little bit more. Actions already contain an intention to do something, right? But so we have those patterns in the music. They afford us to do something along with those patterns. So for example, we mirror them a bit. So because we are empathic, people are empathic beings. And so they go along with those patterns. And so they get in touch with the musical patterns. They decode it by this kind of alignment that goes along with it. They decode it. And so they feel, due to that, they feel with the body what this pattern is doing. And because it is related to your action repertoire that has an intentionality component, you become able to predict what the pattern is going to do in terms of its expression. Okay, because you can mirror, you can link it with your action pattern, and you know from your experience what those patterns do at longer term, a few seconds from here. This type of prediction is different from the type of prediction that we have in pitch, which is, or even rhythms, which is more at millisecond levels, very often that we speak about prediction. So there we get, this is the first step in the embodiment, that we are capable of aligning. And sometimes I make a distinction between synchronization is already a kind of very maybe some kind of discrete kind of alignment. So because you tap along with the beat of the music, it's in a discrete way. But when you do this, it's more kind of attunement with the expressive forms in the music. And this can go deeper and up to empathic alignment, that you really feel the kind of expression in the music. You decode it and you feel it in your own body.
So bringing in digital technologies, media technologies into that equation, the equation that is very clearly patterns and then expressive, kind of the unity of bringing those two together. Enter digital technologies into that, such as the stuff we use in digital scores or any virtually mediated music environment. How does that shift things for us? Add things?
Yes, those expressive forms, they have a strong appeal to our responsive system. And so if you put those expressive forms into your score, yeah, they will tell us more about the typical time, how time evolves, and so on. We can easily appeal it to our body, I think. And there is a person, he gave a talk here last week, Antoniadis. He's a Greek researcher, did his PhD in Strasbourg. He works with annotated scores. He's a pianist, annotated scores, in which he has a graphical score showing the movements of the body, the arms and the hands, and how they move along with the performance of the notes that he has to play in complex contemporary music. That's an example of example of a digital score, an extension of a classical score towards an embodied kind of representation. But of course, we can go much further than that, right? So the first step, I think, is in this alignment. But what the ultimate goal of embodiment is, I think, it's an assumption, but I put it here in the middle. That is that you reverse the cause and effect relationship. The cause is what you get as a pattern from the music. But actually what you do is that you become the cause of the music as a listener. I'm speaking as a listener. You listen to the music, but due to the fact that you do this alignment and so on, you actually conduct the music and you turn the whole thing such that you become the one that actually causes the music, even if you listen to a CD. I put it in a very extreme a kind of image, perhaps, but this is what ultimately, I think, embodiment comes down to. The most important thing is that it helps you to become the master of the music, to become the cause of it.
Yeah, the reason for your understanding of its existence.
Yeah.
And you could also argue within that, let's say there is a digital score with projection or kind of robotics within there, that these extra mediated environments also feed into that, what Walter Murch calls a dimensionality, where we kind of fuse it together and we present back out what you were talking about there, the effect.
And the human, indeed, the human bias is always to predict what the other is going to do. And so if you are confronted with a digital score, also those will be understood as patterns, but you use them to predict what is going to come next. And this is a kind of in terms of cause and effect, this is a kind of Bayesian inference that you do. You see the pattern, but you try to infer what is the cause of that pattern. And often you can yourself be the cause of that pattern.
So is there something in the satisfaction of predicting correctly, or the satisfaction of being incorrect in one's prediction, one's assumption? Is there something within the audience's relationship, their game that they might be playing with themselves, that is able to, you know, augment their experiences?
Yeah, the fact that you are able to predict what is going to happen, and with expression we can predict that quite a long term, or at least several seconds maybe, gives you a feeling of agency. You become an agent in this interactive setup.
Yeah.
And agency, and due to the fact that your response is also an embodied response, so it's perceived as a biosignal by another person. That's a challenge, of course, for a computer system to perceive your own response as something that is meaningful. But this biosignal is indeed a key aspect of this interaction.
Can I just go back on something you just said? Why is it difficult, or why is it a problem, a software engineering problem, I imagine, for the machine?
Yeah, because the machine lacks this kind of action repertoire, and therefore it's very difficult to understand for the machine what you are up to. What is the goal of your?
And is that because of a lack of empathy and a lack of being able to use mirror neurons to see those patterns within others?
Yeah. Well, people believe that with machine learning, maybe you can train a machine so that it has certain repertoires, and to some extent this might work. But of course, we have this machine intelligence is not that far evolved that this really works with machine. But I think this would be necessary to really have a real interaction with a digital environment, and also a digital score, so that it becomes more than just an instruction set for me. If it is an interactive thing, then I would expect that it somehow understands my intentions.
Yeah, or understands that you have intentions and are able to predict. So for instance, I can foresee scenarios where a digital score has agency, has an intelligent agent working in there that is purposefully reaching out to the performer, is what we're talking about here, in order to kind of manipulate or stimulate, invite into the conversation this notion of empathy and pattern prediction.
And agency is, as I said, is related to this ability to predict, which is very much rooted in our embodiment. But there are other embodiment aspects that are important here. One is the, as I said, the body, the gestures are biosignals. They are social things, and very often they are positive because they call for engagement, they call for empathy in other people, so that they have a positive valence in the emotional domain. And the third thing is that when we are engaging with our body, we consume energy to do that. So it's an energetic thing, it's a physical effort that is needed to do that, and that will raise typically our arousal. So we get aroused, but we have a positive biosignals and engaging signals that we are dealing with, and we have agency. Somehow we are confident that we can predict the things that are going to happen. Now, when everything works fine, all those processes work fine, we have the prediction, we have the physical effort, we have the expression and the associated emotional things. When all works fine, I think then we can speak about flow. So flow is the yeah, the optimal usage of all those processes that go together, and that they create a kind of equilibrium in the processing. And that's the moment where we lose, where we have a change of consciousness, and where we have ecstasy, or where we come into a trance or into a flow world, and that we are completely absorbed. And this is, I think, a very rewarding experience. Therefore, it is addictive, because we want to repeat it when it's done. We like it. It's giving us confidence. It's an empowering experience, and it's an empowering experience that we would like to redo and to replicate. And so it has this rewarding effect, is an addictive. I think it can be explained by purely chemical processes to some extent. But the chemical processes are always associated with also what people do, and so you have to see the whole picture. We could bring in hormones and neurotransmitters and so on, but it will support this. This is the theory that the overall theory, that is a flow theory. I would call it the homeostatic theory. And homeostasis means equal state. Homeo, equal, stasis, state. And so you are capable of bringing those processes into an equilibrium, which is a state of interacting that you can maintain for a while. And I think digital scores, according to me, maybe future digital scores, I don't know if they exist already, should maybe also act as a kind of biofeedback system. That means, but that implies that the system will be able to read out some of your processes, that it notices that you go towards a homeostatic state, and that it supports you to go to that state. Well, if you can create such a system, you will become famous. I can guarantee you.
That's a good challenge. Thank you. I will email you a link of my embodied musicking data set as well, which again kind of grapples with that as a notion. I do want to go back to flow in a second, but there was something that you said earlier about these biosignals. And in the early days of teaching digital performance, when we used to use Isadora and Connect, I would do an experiment with undergraduate performing artists where I'd ask them to find 2 points, any points, 2 points that were moving, and just draw a line between it. And in real time, they would be represented just as a single line that kind of shifts and changes. And what I always found fascinating was it had a humanness to it. We were able to see that it wasn't an algorithm or a generated thing, that actually it kind of encaptured some coarse DNA of the person that it was encapsulated. And the reason why I mention that is because I just wonder if in your experience, there are other biosignals that can be captured and used through mediated technology that can also then be used as an agent within a musicking environment where it excites those similar biosignals that you were talking about there, whether or not that's something you've come across.
For me, for me, a biosignal is everything that can be noticed by another person, but with our technologies, this can be more than what people can notice, because we can also, but in principle, the biosignal is any kind of signal that transmits some change in the body, whatever changes, temperature, movements of limbs and so on. Also brain activity. Now, brain activity is something that perhaps we cannot see, but we can measure it and we can make it visual, and we can include it as part of a digital score, because the brain is normally slightly ahead of what you do with the rest of your body. So it could be used in certain in certain applications, I think, as an indicator of something that is going on.
Yeah, or a feedback loop, or a way of connecting deeply with some intelligent processes.
Yeah. So, and in my work, and I make this distinction between two things. The monitoring aspect is what you would like to, what you measure with your devices, with your interactive systems, and then the biofeedback is what you give as feedback. But of course, in between is this kind of understanding that you would like to have in your digital environment of what the person, the human, is doing. And that's of course an unsolved problem up to now. Small things we can do, yes, but the real things that makes communication between humans so engaging is not yet there, I think. And for that reason, in times of COVID and lockdowns and so on, we have been looking at ways of interacting that are not physical, for example, via Zoom links, but also via 3D avatars, which is probably the next thing to come, made by big companies. And what we see in our first results that it makes a difference. That the 3D thing is and if you think about it, it's quite natural because perception works in such a way that you do active sampling of your environment. So that means to get an image of you, I do a little bit like this, and I immediately get a better view than when I look at the screen. I have no possibility to do active sampling, right? I see just this one single viewpoint.
Yes,
and
it's stream of pixels.
And so to be engaged with the other person, this 3D thing, even if it is realized at a distance, assume that you are in another room, but I see you with HoloLens or something in 3D. I think that this changes the interaction. Also the interaction with musicians. And from there to an avatar is something interesting.
Is that because it's a space?
I think the space plays
rather than a
role.
flatness.
I think that human cognition is space, a movement in space. That's what human cognition is. I think even at least myself, if I do mathematics, it's movement in space, dealing with matrices, and I think that's a spatial thing, rotation and so on. So.
Can I get back to the notions of the flow state and what
sure.
Homeostasis? I mean, we're kind of in the last 5 minutes or so. So we kind of speedy, isn't it?
Yes.
But I think the notions of the flow state, what the articles and papers of yours that I quote in the back, from the past, have heavily influenced my understanding of the flow state and what happens. But I am reaching a point where I'm, and I think I said it in the talk there, that I don't think it's a single state. I think it's maybe switchable. So as soon as I pick up an instrument and start playing, I can be in the flow. I don't have to force it. It kind of can happen just because of the many years of experience I've had. But at the same time, when I'm in it, it's a variable thing. And I wonder if you've kind of come across that in this notion of homeostasis.
Yes, there we make a distinction between two types of feedback. But this is classical stuff. You can read that on the internet. So you have a negative feedback is the auto-correction thing. Assume you are on a balance board. And so you do constantly, you do correction. You go a bit this side, I know you counteract. So this negative feedback is a kind of a regulation that you do. This is within particular bands that you have freedom to do this. Because if you go too much like this, it's over.
But that is a mental process.
It's not only a mental process, or I would say, because we do it very much in unconscious way.
Okay.
It's very much embodied, I would say.
Yeah.
It's regulated by our sensory motoric mechanisms. Yeah. It's not regulated by our cognitive, by our will. Of course, yeah, we need to have the focus of regulating, but this regulation is much a kind of automatic
okay
thing.
Yeah,
well, maybe.
Yeah, no, I can see parallels that with playing in a pop band, for instance, where the groove's not quite right. Everybody's in the flow.
Exactly.
There's some pushing and shoving maybe to find that.
And so in the context of a music ensemble, and even with the digital score environment, there would be co-regulation that does this kind of negative feedback.
Yeah.
You go a little bit too fast. Okay, I go a little bit slower.
Yes.
In order to, because each of us, the musicians, and also the digital score, would build up the tempo that is shared among all the members of the ensemble.
Yeah.
But of course, each does it on the basis of what they hear and what they act. But you would assume a good performance that there is a perfect overlap of the ideas of the tempo.
And a good ensemble about an agreed way of consolidating.
But you will always have this variability. You must have the variability. Let us clear about that. You cannot keep equilibrium by not having variability.
Yeah.
The variability just allows you to keep this homeostatic level, flow level. But that's all regulated by negative feedback.
Yeah.
What we call positive feedback then is that you change from one state to another. Tempo is a very easy domain. To give an example, you start playing at the tempo of 90 BPM and you move to 120 BPM. 90 BPM is a homeostatic state kept by the co-regulation of all the musicians together. But suddenly something happens and you shift to 120. In the beginning, it may be a bit, clumsy, but then you end up having a very stable new state. In that example, it's easy to see that these are two different states. But of course, if we work in more multimedia structures, I also believe that you can have different states, but it's just, you could, I think, understand it as having different constellations of equilibrium things that work then with the negative feedback to keep it going on.
Yeah.
But you can change constellation and then you settle down into a new stability due to the co-regulation and the negative feedback. And the move from one to another would be called positive feedback.
Yes. Well, that relates a great deal to my experiences, let's say, working in the theatre or something where there's an agreed tempo, and maybe you feel there's people pushing and shoving, but then in a sequence where there is a retardo or rallentando, slowing down or speeding up, actually those battles cease, and we all work together as a kind of positive constellation to make that shift into that. Let's say,
in some of our experiments, not with music making, but in therapy and so on, we have been using, for example, metronomes to drive particular actions. You could see the metronome as part of your digital scoring system. Now, what we see that people find it much easier to synchronize with a metronome that is not perfectly isochronous. You know this, of course. So a little bit variability that is human-like is much more easier to work to work with. This is based on this idea of co-regulation, that you need a little bit of variability to be able to maintain stability in your interaction.
I'm aware of time. I promised 30 minutes. We're a little over. Is there something that you would like to say that you haven't said to kind of to wrap this up? Something that you or maybe reflect on something that you have said that you wish to draw further attention to and importance?
Well, I think it's a great project that you have, Craig, and this project will, I think, stimulate people to think about these ideas and to explore them further. And with your project, you can really bring many researchers together, because I think our community is quite large, and many people work on different things, but there is a we are moving in our culture, I think, towards a techno culture.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about that. And this techno culture is something new. I think it's like the invention of the opera in the early 1600s, Monteverdi and so on, where they put different layers, acting, theater, acting, music, decor, literature together in platform of different layers. Now we have this, the digital world allows us to connect at micro layers in different ways. And so the whole thing becomes something new, and like they used at the time to write a libretto and a score. The digital score is something that allows us to create narratives in this techno culture. And this is something that an important concept is the narrative, how the digital score deals with the narrative in this techno culture.
And I think we're richer for understanding that by understanding what's going on with embodiment and agency, and the empathetic.
Yes, this is the motor of the whole thing. That drives how you interact with this environment. But I think it's wonderful that you are doing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll shake your hand. Thank you. Weird thing. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark. Let's stop it there.